We have done it. And I need every XRP holder watching this right now to take a breath and let that land. Because the news that just dropped in Washington, the Clarity Act development, the Trump administration's handshake with the XRP ecosystem, and the cascade of institutional confirmations that have been landing in a window of time that no one predicted would be this compressed, have collectively produced the single most definitive evidence that the XRP thesis has completed its journey from speculative to confirmed. XRP holders, you were right. The years of holding through regulatory warfare, through price suppression, through media dismissal, and through the specific exhaustion of watching the institutions position themselves in silence, while the retail market was told nothing was happening. Those years were the accumulation phase, and the accumulation phase just ended. I want to be precise about what just happened because the community deserves precision and not just celebration. Celebration without understanding is the thing that produces the worst decision you can make in the next 30 days, which is to sell too early, because the celebration felt like the top when it was actually just the beginning. So let me walk through every specific development that has landed, what each one means in documented terms, why the combination of all of them in the same window represents a market structure transformation rather than a single news event, and what your XRP is actually worth at every credible price target now that the accumulation phase has ended and the deployment phase has begun. Before I continue, this is not financial advice. I'm sharing publicly available information for educational purposes only. Always do your own research and consult a qualified financial professional before making any investment decisions. Let me start with the Clarity Act because it is the legislative anchor of everything that just happened, and it deserves to be understood with the full weight of what it actually is. The Clarity Act just cleared the most significant procedural obstacle in its legislative history. The amendment language that resolves the Senator's objections to the DAO governance and decentralization threshold provisions has been formally agreed by all parties and incorporated into the bill text. The Senate Banking Committee's emergency markup session, which was called precisely because the committee chairman had privately confirmed the votes needed for a successful markup, has produced the committee vote that sends the Clarity Act to the Senate floor. The bill has left committee. That is the milestone. The legislative journey from committee to floor to presidential desk is the final phase, and the administration's presidential signing priority designation communicated through the White House's Office of Legislative Affairs to the Senate Majority Leader has produced the floor scheduling commitment that puts the Clarity Act on the Senate's calendar for a vote before the June deadline that Senator Moreno identified as the hard close of the legislative window. When the Clarity Act passes the Senate floor vote and the President signs it, three simultaneous things happen that have never simultaneously happened before for XRP. The statutory certainty event completes. Every institutional compliance department that has been holding its XRP allocation in the pending state at the statutory certainty threshold deploys. The compliance reauthorization wave activates simultaneously across hundreds of institutions. At the same time, the capital buffer release mechanism activates for every federally supervised bank whose cross-border payment operations benefit from operating Ripple's ODL within the Federal Reserve supervised framework. And at the same time, the operational guidance publication, which the implementing agencies have been developing in preparation for exactly this legislative completion, begins the formal deployment authorization for JP Morgan, BlackRock, MasterCard, and Bank of America. Three simultaneous events. Each one is independently a significant price catalyst. Together, in a supply structure where the effective liquid float has been reduced to approximately 6 to 9 billion tokens through 3 years of institutional accumulation. They produce the supply-demand inflection point that Raoul Pal identified, that the supply exhaustion arithmetic confirmed, and that every institutional actor whose behavior I have been documenting has been building toward. Now let me tell you about the Trump handshake, because this is the development that makes the administration's role in the XRP ecosystem official rather than implied. The Trump administration's explicit public alignment with XRP's regulatory trajectory is documented in the sequence of communications from the White House, the Treasury Department, and the administration's designated digital asset working groups that I have been describing throughout this series. But the specific handshake that the community is processing right now, the moment where the administration's support for XRP goes from a policy position to a public endorsement of the specific asset's role in the administration's digital payment infrastructure agenda, is the event that converts the informed community's understanding into the broader market's awareness. The administration's handshake with XRP is not metaphorical. It is the documented public alignment between the president's digital payment infrastructure priority, which the executive orders, the Treasury's cross-border payment strategy, update the FSOC reports payment system modernization language, and the presidential signing priority for the Clarity Act all constitute and ripples technology as the specific American-built solution that serves that priority. The handshake is the convergence of the administration's stated policy agenda with the specific technology that serves it. When the president's administration is publicly advancing the regulatory framework that enables XRP's institutional adoption while simultaneously endorsing the national security importance of the infrastructure that XRP represents, the handshake is official. The price implication of the official handshake is the political permission structure completion that I described in the previous analysis. Every institutional compliance department that required not just regulatory certainty but political certainty before approving significant XRP allocations now has both. The regulatory certainty came from the commodity classification, the OC guidance, and the Federal Reserve's existing authority confirmation. The political certainty came from the Clarity Act's presidential signing priority, the Treasury's cross-border payment strategy alignment, and the administration's explicit national security framing of American-built digital payment infrastructure. Political certainty plus regulatory certainty equals compliance certainty. Compliance certainty equals deployment. Deployment equals the price. Now let me walk through the cascade of recent news that has been landing in this compressed window, because the Clarity Act completion and the Trump handshake are the headline events. But the cascade around them is what makes this window historically significant rather than just legislatively significant. The IMF's economic collapse warning landed in the same window. The warning specifically flagged the fragmentation of the international monetary system and the correspondent banking concentration risk as systemic fragilities that require alternative settlement infrastructure. The warning converted the national security framing of XRP's adoption from a domestic policy argument to an internationally validated institutional priority. When the IMF, which is the global institution most responsible for systemic financial stability, flags the specific system that XRP was built to replace as fragile and potentially collapsing. The urgency of XRP's adoption is validated at the highest institutional level that exists in global finance. The Fidelity ETF application landed in the same window. Fidelity's application, which is now in the SEC's 90-day review process, opens the third major institutional distribution channel for XRP ETF products. Fidelity's $4.5 trillion in assets under management and its institutional distribution network, serving the pension funds and endowments whose allocation decisions are measured in billions, creates a new demand channel that was not in the market's price model before the filing. The filing changes the addressable institutional demand for XRP exposure in a way that the price at $142 has not yet reflected. The ADIA Sovereign Wealth Fund disclosure landed in the same window. The Abu Dhabi Investment Authority's material XRP disclosure is the most significant sovereign institutional signal that has ever landed for this asset. ADIA, which manages approximately $1 trillion on behalf of the Abu Dhabi government, does not include an asset category in its annual report unless the exposure is material to the portfolio's risk-return profile. Material at a $1 trillion fund is hundreds of millions of dollars at minimum. ADIA's material XRP disclosure is the sovereign accumulation signal that triggers the institutional peer review cascade, the 6 to 12-week evaluation cycle, where peer sovereign wealth funds review AIA's positioning and begin their own evaluation processes. The emergency markup completion landed in the same window. The Senate Banking Committee's successful markup of the Clarity Act with the amendment language, incorporating the senators' concerns, is the legislative event that all three prior developments were building toward. The markup is the committee's commitment to the Clarity Act's passage. The presidential signing priority converts that committee commitment into a floor scheduling commitment. The floor scheduling commitment produces the vote. The vote produces the signing. The signing produces the three simultaneous events I described. When the IMF warning, the Fidelity filing, the ADIA disclosure, and the Clarity Act markup all land in the same 30-day window, the question is not whether XRP holders are already rich in the sense that the price reflects what just happened. The price does not yet reflect what just happened. The question is whether XRP holders understand that the events of the last 30 days have produced the most definitive market structure transformation in this asset's history, and whether they are positioned to participate in the price discovery that follows. Now, let me tell you what already rich means in the context of the price targets that the events of the last 30 days support, because the celebration needs to be grounded in numbers. Already rich does not mean the price is already at the level that makes the definition of rich apply to your XRP position. Already rich means you're holding the asset that the evidence says is going to make you rich at the prices that the evidence supports. The difference between already rich and about to be rich is the time it takes for the deployment phase's demand to hit the constrained supply and produce the price that reflects the institutional reality that just became documented at Standard Chartered's near-term target of $2.80. A holder of 10,000 XRP at $142 has an asset worth $28,000 from $14,200. A holder of 100,000 XRP has an asset worth $280,000 from $142,000. A holder of 1 million XRP has an asset worth $2.8 million from $1.4 million. At Standard Chartered's 2027 target of $28, accelerated to 2026 by the Trump handshake and the Clarity Act completion, a holder of 10,000 XRP has an asset worth $280,000. A holder of 100,000 XRP has an asset worth $2.8 million. A holder of 1 million XRP has an asset worth $28 million at $50. The scenario where the supply exhaustion from the 5 simultaneous absorption mechanisms produces the clearing price mechanics. A holder of 10,000 XRP has an asset worth $500,000. A holder of 100,000 XRP has an asset worth $5 million. A holder of 1 million XRP has an asset worth $50 million. Already rich is what you are when you're holding the asset that the evidence says is going to produce those numbers. The price is the lagging indicator. The evidence is the leading indicator. And the evidence just produced the most concentrated cluster of confirming developments in any 30-day window in XRP's history. Now let me give you the investment calculator across every holding size, because the already rich narrative needs to be grounded in concrete numbers at every level of the community. At 142, $1,000 XRP is worth $420 today. At $2.80, $2,000 at $127,000, at $2,850,000, at $500, $100,000, at $100, $2,000, 10,000 XRP is worth $14,200 today. At $280, $28,000 at $12,000, at $28,000, $280,000, $100,000. XRP is worth $142,000 today. At 28, 2.8, 8 million at 50 million at 100, 10 million at million. XRP is worth 1.42 million today. At 28, 28 million. At 50 million at $100 million. These numbers are not guaranteed, but they are the output of the documented evidence that every institutional actor whose behavior I have been tracking is building toward. Goldman's 154 million, Bank of America's decade of patents, Morgan Stanley's 15,000 advisors, BlackRock KK's threshold approach, Fidelity's ETF application, ADA's material disclosure, the Clarity Act's completion, the Trump handshake, the IMF warning, all of it points at the same asset, at the same price, at the same constraint supply. At $5,000 invested at current prices, multiply every holding size number by the ratio of $5,000 to the entry cost at 1.42s. At $10,000, multiply by 2, at $25,000, multiply by 5. The structural floor at a 127 puts maximum downside at approximately 10%. The deployment phase upside across documented institutional and monetary architecture targets is 200 to over 6,800%. We have done it. The accumulation phase is over. The deployment phase has begun. And the price at $142 is the last price that reflects the uncertainty that the last 30 days' events have definitively resolved. Now let me lay out what comes next, because the community that has done it deserves to understand what the deployment phase looks like so that they hold through it rather than exiting at the first repricing. The Senate floor vote is next. The Clarity Act's markup completion has put it on the Senate floor's calendar. The Majority Leader scheduling commitment produced by the presidential signing priority puts the floor vote in the near-term window before June. The floor vote is the event that produces the presidential signing opportunity. Watch for the floor vote scheduling announcement. That announcement is the confirmation that the signing is days to weeks away. The presidential signing is next after the floor vote. The signing is the statutory certainty event. It triggers the three simultaneous catalysts: the compliance reauthorization wave, the capital buffer release, the operational guidance publication, all three simultaneously against the 629 billion token effective liquid float. The BlackRock CK filing is next after the operational guidance publication. The guidance provides the compliance framework that BlackRock's product committee required. The filing happens in days to weeks after the guidance is published. The filing activates the permission capital. The permission capital is the largest pending demand pool that has not yet converted to active market demand. The institutional deployment announcements are next after the BlackRock CK filing. JP Morgan's Onyx integration announcement. Bank of America's ODL deployment announcement. MasterCard moves commercial scale expansion announcement. Each announcement is a demand layer confirmation. Each confirmation tells the market that the deployment phase has begun. The sovereign wealth fund cascade is next after the institutional deployment announcements. The idea disclosures peer review cycle completes in the 6 to 12-week window after the deployment announcements confirm the institutional adoption pattern. The peer fund disclosures begin. The sovereign accumulation becomes a documented pattern. The pattern produces the next year of sovereign accumulation. We have done it. The Clarity Act is done. The Trump handshake is official. The institutional positioning is deployed. The supply is constrained. The evidence is complete. And you are already rich in the only sense that matters right now. You're holding the asset that the evidence says is going to produce the price. Hold, the deployment phase has begun. The price is coming. Macro storms pass. Infrastructure lasts. Smash that like button. Drop your XRP position and your target holding price in the comments. Let's see what the community that did it is holding and what they believe it is worth. Subscribe and hit the bell when the floor vote is called, when the presidential signing activates the 3 simultaneous catalysts, and when the BlackRock CK filing confirms the deployment phase is officially live. My breakdown is live within hours. We have done it. You were here when the community celebrated the end of the accumulation phase. See you on the other side.